Most of you probably only know Sun Wukong through the hit game Black Myth Wukong. In the original legend, Wukong is a stone monkey, born from the condensed essence of heaven and earth. After training under a master and becoming immensely powerful, he storms the heavenly court and earns the title Great Sage Equal to Heaven. That rebellion doesn't end well. The Buddha seals him beneath a mountain for 500 years. To atone, Wukong later escorts Tang Sanzang on the journey to the west to retrieve sacred scriptures. After enduring 81 trials, they succeed, and Wukong is granted the Buddhist title, Victorious Fighting Buddha. But that's only the clean version, the surface-level story. In reality, Journey to the West has multiple darker variants that paint a far more brutal, unsettling picture. And today, we're not talking about the polite, redeemed Wukong. We're talking about an absurdly powerful, reckless, and defiant Wukong. Basically an Eastern anti-hero taken to the extreme. So the question is, when you drop that Wukong into the Injustice universe, what happens?
The Tower of Fate sat above Salem like a needle punched through the skin of reality. Tilted at an angle that made no geometric sense, its stone face unmarked by weather or time, its windows dark from the outside and burning with cold light from within. It existed slightly beside the world. Not above it, not outside it. Beside it, close enough to see everything, and far enough to touch nothing. Inside, Kent Nelson stood at a glass that showed him everything he did not want to see. Year 4. That was what they were calling it now, as if numbering the catastrophe made it easier to carry. 4 years since Metropolis. 4 years since a man who had once pulled children from burning buildings began pulling dissidents from their homes instead. The regime had names for what it did: stabilization, enforcement, necessary order. But Nelson had lived long enough to recognize the machinery underneath the vocabulary. The words were always about protection. The outcome was always about control. Below, the world churned. The Amazon offensive had pushed 3 regime battalions back across the Rhine. Wonder Woman's counterstrike neutralized the Amazon forward position within 6 hours. Batman's insurgency had lost another safe house in Prague, not to combat, but to surveillance. Someone inside had carried a phone with location services enabled. A small, stupid error. 3 people were now in a regime detention facility outside Vienna, waiting for a tribunal that would never quite arrive. Nelson observed all of it through a surface that was not a window, so much as a wound in perception. A place where fate's power pooled and showed him the shape of things. He had been doing this for 4 years. He had become, if nothing else, very good at it. The helm of Nabu sat on its stand across the room, golden and patient. It always felt patient. Nelson sometimes suspected it was waiting for him to make a decision it had already calculated. He turned away from the window. That was when the air cracked. Not broke, not shattered. Cracked the way ice sounds when something heavy steps onto it from a direction that should not exist. A single hairline fracture opened in the space above the tower's main floor, running from floor to ceiling in less than a second, and through it came light that was not from this sun. It was older light. It had the quality of something that had passed through too many versions of the sky to remember which one it started in. Nelson's hand moved toward the helm before he completed the thought. He did not put it on. The crack widened. Then a staff came through, first black iron ancient, its surface worn smooth by hands that had held it across centuries and continents and dimensions that had no names in any language Nelson had studied. The staff was roughly 6 feet long. It was also, Nelson understood, with the specific vertigo of a man who measured power for a living, capable of being considerably longer. Then the owner followed it through. Sun Wukong stepped into the Tower of Fate the way a man steps into a convenience store. No ceremony, no announcement, no particular acknowledgement that crossing between dimensions was supposed to cost something. He was shorter than Nelson expected, which was always the first mistake people made. He wore armor that carried the memory of 100 battlefields without looking burdened by any of them. His gaze moved around the room with quick cataloging attention, not assessing threats, but rating entertainment value. He clocked the helm of Nabu on its stand. He clocked the viewing glass. He clocked Nelson. Then he walked to the glass and looked down at the city below, convoys. At the checkpoints, the regime broadcast towers, pulsing blue-white light into the night sky, a patrol moving through a crowd outside a detention center with the practiced efficiency of people who had done it many times and expected to do it many more. "Huh," he said. Nelson waited. Wukong tilted his head slightly left, the way someone tilts their head at a painting that almost makes sense. The crowd below scattered in pieces. The patrol logged the faces that stayed. Nelson had watched this particular sequence resolve 17 times across different cities in the past month. The math never changed. "They kept the whole setup," Wukong said. "Flags, uniforms, checkpoints, the complete kit." He glanced back at Nelson. "And you keep watch up here." Not a question. "I maintain balance," Nelson said. "Balance." Wukong tried the word like he was checking whether it was hollow. That's a good name for staying out of trouble. Acting without full understanding of consequence. "Yeah." Wukong cut in, still easy, still almost amused. "Good thing you're not acting at all." He turned back to the glass and tapped it once with a single finger. The image jumped, not controlled, not redirected, but startled the way a compass needle jumps when something magnetic passes too close. The view stuttered outward through the European theater, lurched across the North American regime grid, snagged for a moment on the upper atmosphere anomalies Nelson had been tracking for 3 weeks, then snapped back to Salem like a rubber band released. "You should not be able to do that," Nelson said. "I didn't." Wukong pulled his hand back unbothered. "Your tower flinched. Not my fault." He rolled the staff once across his palm, a habitual motion barely conscious. "The man in red, the one who decided he owns all of this. Superman. Jade Emperor with a cape." Wukong's tone carried no heat, only the flat recognition of someone identifying a familiar species in a new habitat. "Throne Enforcer's official truth. Started with a tragedy, I'm guessing. They always start with a tragedy. The tragedy is what they use to make the cage sound like a gift." He paused. "Seen it before. Didn't end well for the cage." Nelson looked at him carefully. "Why are you here?" Far below, the broadcast towers pulsed. The blue-white light drifted through cloud cover like a slow, artificial tide. "I got bored," Wukong said. Then, as if remembering a secondary reason, "And your man in red looks like he's begging to be heckled." Nelson waited for something more. There was nothing more. Wukong set the butt of his staff against the tower floor. One clean sound, like a period ending a sentence that had already made its point, and then he was simply gone. No returning crack, no light. Just the room now holding one fewer impossible thing than it had 60 seconds ago. On the stone where he had stood, a single hair rested. Golden, faintly warm, already losing its glow. Nelson regarded it for a long moment. Then he looked at the helm. The helm did not move. It was as it had always been, unhurried. He crossed back to the glass and observed the patrol complete its work. The crowd finished dispersing. The detention center's lights stayed on. 3 blocks north, a regime surveillance drone banked through its circuit sensors, cataloging every face that had been on that street in the last 20 minutes. Nelson did not reach for the helm, but for the first time in a long while, he also did not turn away. Year 4 had variables enough, fuses running in enough directions that the best a man with genuine foresight could manage was tracking which ones led where before one of them ran out of length. He had been tracking fuses for 4 years. He knew their signatures, the regime's slow institutional pressure. The insurgency's calculated attrition, the Amazon incursion, the upper atmosphere readings he hadn't told anyone about yet. He did not know the signature of what had just been standing in his tower. That was the problem. Not the power he had cataloged power of many magnitudes. Not the danger was a constant he had learned to metabolize. The problem was that something had crossed his field of perception, and his instruments had not known what to do with it. The viewing glass had flinched. In 4 years of watching it, had never flinched. What comes next? Nelson said quietly, to the room, to the helm, to the fading hair on the floor. Mere mortals cannot stop. The tower held its silence. It always did. The Hall of Justice had been built to mean something. That was the problem with symbols. They kept meaning things long after the people inside them stopped deserving it. The building still had the columns, the sight lines designed to make anyone approaching feel small in a specific intentional way. It had been retrofitted for Year 4 blast panels. Behind the glass reinforced sublevels, a dedicated surveillance hub on the 3rd floor that ran feeds from 43 cities simultaneously. The regime had kept the name. They usually kept the names. Names were cheaper than new architecture, and they came preloaded with trust. Tonight, the hall was a battlefield. It had started 6 hours ago, when the Amazon Vanguard crossed the perimeter at the eastern access point. Not a full invasion, more an assertion of presence, a message delivered in bodies and impact craters. The regime's rapid response had met them at the main concourse. By hour 3, the insurgency had moved in through the underground access tunnels. They'd been mapping the building's utility grid for months, not to fight either side, but to pull 2 of their own people out of a regime holding cell 2 levels down. By hour 5, all 3 groups occupied different sections of the building, and none of them could leave without walking through one of the others. The kill box had formed itself from the main concourse. Concrete columns pocked with craters. Regime soldiers dug in behind overturned security stations, rifles up targeting systems, pinging back and forth across the open ground. An Amazon detachment held the east stairs shields, locked a golden lariat coiled and ready at the lead fighter's hip. Somewhere in the sub-level access corridor, Batman's people were trying very quietly to not exist. Then the ceiling cracked. Not the structure, the air. A single fracture 10 feet up, trailing heat that had no source in this building or this atmosphere. It sealed itself in under 2 seconds. What it left behind was a figure standing at the center of the open concourse staff, planted head tilting as he scanned the space. With the unhurried attention of a man who has walked into a room mid-argument and is deciding whether it's worth interrupting, Wukong surveyed the Hall of Justice. He took in the regime line, 30 soldiers, 2 armored vehicle units positioned at the main entrance, a surveillance drone running a figure-8 pattern above the mezzanine. He took in the Amazon position, disciplined tight, the kind of defensive geometry that had held ground against creatures older than most of the civilizations in this room. 3 regime personnel watched from the sub-level stairwell doorway through a cracked door. Their expressions passed fear and into something quieter and more practical. He set the butt of his staff against the tile. The nearest regime soldier training, overriding confusion, raised his rifle and fired. The burst hit Wukong's center mass and scattered. Not deflected, not blocked. The rounds lost their intention, somewhere in the last 2 feet of travel tumbling out of coherence. And by the time they passed through the space where Wukong stood, they were strips of paper. They drifted to the ground in a slow, stupid spiral, the way receipts fall out of a wallet. The soldier stared at his rifle. The rifle had no explanation to offer. Wukong had not moved. The armored unit at the entrance brought its main cannon to bear a weapon rated for siege engagement. The kind of hardware that didn't belong inside a building, if you wanted the building to survive. The shot came out as a sound wave. First, the pressure of it rattling the remaining intact windows, and then the impact reached Wukong, and the vehicle's entire front axle sank 8 inches into the concrete as its wheels converted to compacted mud. The cannon shell itself, caught somewhere in the physics of what was happening in this building right now, dropped straight down and landed as a solid disk of rust. The driver stayed in the vehicle. This was the correct decision. An Amazon warrior, younger, faster, probably trying to prove something, broke from the eastern rank and closed the distance in 4 strides. Spear leveled the full weight of the Themysciran training behind the thrust. It was a good strike. It would have gone through most things. Wukong sidestepped it by approximately 4 inches. The spear passed through the gap. The warrior's momentum carried her forward, and she stopped herself with the precise, humiliating control of someone who knows exactly how badly she overcommitted. She turned. Wukong was looking at the surveillance unit above the mezzanine. The aerial unit had been running its figure 8 above the mezzanine, logging. Everything standard regime surveillance protocol, continuous feed to the 3rd floor hub, and from there to the central archive. It had captured the paper rounds. It had captured the mud wheels. It was capturing this. Wukong looked directly into its camera. Not at it. Into it. The way you look at a person, not a machine. 1 beat. Then he looked away. He raised the staff and swept it in a single horizontal arc. Not fast, almost conversational, the kind of motion you'd use to clear a table. The sweep passed through the regime weapons along the near line. Rifles came apart at the receivers. Ammunition blocks crumbled to chalk. The sidearms on 3 soldiers clicked open and emptied themselves of anything useful. None of this produced wounds. It produced a sound low and dry, like a shelf of old books settling, and then the weapons were decorative. He lowered the staff. "That stuff," he said to no one in particular, and therefore to everyone, "is very loud for something that doesn't work." The main hall went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone in them is doing rapid private recalculation. The regime soldiers didn't break. They had training for this for the moment when the situation stopped following recognizable rules. They compressed into tighter ranks, shifted to hand signals. The squad leader's hand going to the emergency comm on his collar. The signal would go up the chain. Superman would have it within minutes. The Amazon line had not shifted either. Their captain, a woman who had fought at Troy, though she kept that to herself in mixed company, was watching Wukong with the particular stillness of someone filing information. She had not ordered a second strike. The first one had already told her what she needed to know about the category of problem she was looking at. Her hand moved once, a slight gesture behind her back, and her detachment shifted 6 inches to the left in unison. Tightening, not retreating. Opening angles, not closing distance. She was good. In the sub-level doorway, the gap between door and frame had widened by 2 more inches. Batman's people were still there, still watching. The one closest to the gap had a comms unit at her ear, and her lips were moving without making sound. Wukong walked to the center of the atrium seal, the old Justice League emblem cracked and partially repainted with the regime's own mark, and considered it for a moment. Then he glanced up at the drone, which had completed its figure 8 and was coming back around. He took one of his hairs between 2 fingers, breathed on it, and released it. It rose, shifted, and became a sparrow that flew once around the dome and perched on the aerial unit's forward sensor housing. The machine's feed began transmitting the sparrow's immediate vicinity in high definition. The 3rd floor surveillance hub would be looking at a bird. The squad leader's hand was still on his collar comm. His voice, when it came out, was the controlled flatness of someone reading from a script their body no longer believed in. Unidentified hostile, Hall of Justice, requesting authorization for escalated response. Hostile, Wukong said. He seemed to find the word interesting. He rolled it once, testing the weight. All right. He turned and fixed his gaze on the Amazon captain. She met the look without adjustment. You're not going to charge again, he said. Not a question. Not until I understand what I'm charging, she said. Smart. He said it without warmth, but without condescension, either the flat acknowledgement of a correct answer. Go home. The rules just changed and you didn't write them. Her jaw moved. She had not been told to go home since before Rome fell. This is not your decision. No, he agreed. He picked up the staff and rested it across his shoulders. But you're welcome to wait and see whose it is. The comm at the squad leader's collar crackled. The response from upstairs was 3 words. Find him first. Wukong's staff came off his shoulders. He planted it and vaulted the central barrier in a single motion, landed on the mezzanine level, looked back down at the concourse. With the expression of a man who has satisfied a minor curiosity and is ready to move on. Below him, the surveillance unit completed its circuit, the Sparrow still riding its housing, broadcasting nothing useful to anyone. He pulled the Sparrow back. It dissolved into a single golden strand that he tucked away and let the machine have its camera back. It would record approximately 4 seconds of him standing on the mezzanine, looking down at the spandex, the armor plating the chalk where the guns used to be. He shook his head once. Not disgusted, just mildly, unimpressed the way a craftsman looks at shoddy work. And then he was gone. No crack, no light, just the mezzanine railing and the empty air where he'd been standing. He left the staff's impression in the tile of the concourse. A circular mark clean-edged about the diameter of a coin. The regime soldiers held their positions. The Amazon captain gave a sharp command in ancient Greek, and her detachment pulled back to the east stairs in good order, shields still up, nobody running. In the sub-level doorway, the gap closed silently, and the door clicked shut with the care of people who had survived this long by being very difficult to notice. The squad leader's collar comm crackled again. Superman's voice came through, not over the public channel, not the broadcast tone he used for the cameras, but the tight frequency of a private command line. It had the quality of controlled pressure, a fist that hasn't opened yet. What exactly hit our formation? The squad leader registered the paper rounds on the ground. His eyes moved to the mud where the armored unit's wheels had been. Then to the chalk residue of his soldiers' ammunition. Sir, he said carefully, we're not sure it was a what? A 3-second pause on the line. That pause cost something. Everyone in the room could feel it costing something, the way you can feel a temperature drop before you understand why. Lock down the building, Superman said. I'm on my way. In the surveillance hub on the 3rd floor, a technician was reviewing the aerial unit's recorded feed frame by frame, trying to locate the exact moment coherence dropped. The Sparrow appeared at timestamp 23:14:07 and disappeared at 23:14:11. In those 4 seconds, the sensor array had dutifully recorded wing coloration, beak angle, and the specific way the bird's head moved when it tracked something below. The technician flagged the file and sent it up the chain with a note, asset unidentified. Method of incursion unidentified. Method of exit unidentified. Recommend treating as priority level unknown. Priority level unknown. The regime had categories for most things. Unknown was its own category, and it sat outside the filing system in a way that made the whole system uncomfortable. The Hall of Justice held its damage-pocked columns, ruined vehicles, chalk and paper and mud. And the emblem on the deck sat under the staff mark like a signature someone else had left on a document they hadn't been invited to sign. Wonder Woman had seen the footage before she landed. The aerial unit's feed had been corrupted, a Sparrow of all things riding the sensor housing while the Hall of Justice came apart below it. But the ground-level cameras had kept recording until the weapons went decorative. She had watched the playback twice on the transport. Once to understand the sequence, once to understand what she was walking into. She did not watch it a third time. She had what she needed. The hall's main concourse was still processing its own damage when she arrived, chalk residue on the ground. A vehicle sitting axle deep in concrete that had recently been load-bearing 24 soldiers standing in positions their training had calculated and Wukong had made irrelevant. The Amazon detachment had pulled back to the east stairs. Batman's people had evaporated through the utility tunnels the moment the situation clarified itself. What remained was a regime cordon holding a building that no longer had anything worth cordoning. Wonder Woman walked through it without breaking stride. The squad leader met her at the central seal. He gave her a precise accounting incursion method, unknown method of exit, unknown casualties, 0 material losses, significant footage tagged and uploaded. He was professional. He had the particular posture of a man who has survived something he doesn't have vocabulary for and has decided that professionalism is the correct response to that gap. She listened. She asked 2 questions. Then, she began to understand what the problem actually was. Not the power. She had fought things with power. The problem was the category. Every protocol the regime had built for containing threats assumed the threat wanted something it could be denied, territory information. Leverage survival. Remove the want and the protocol had nothing to push against. Whatever had walked through that space had not wanted any of those things. It had come in, broken the toys, and left. That made it, in a specific operational sense, ungovernable. She did not say this aloud. She issued 4 orders, instead reinforced the perimeter sweep. The utility access points ground all civilian air traffic within 12 blocks, prepare a containment unit with electromagnetic suppression capability. The squad leader transmitted them up the chain without comment. She was still issuing the 4th order when the air in the northeast corner of the concourse shifted. Not a crack this time, no light, no fracture in the visible architecture of the room. The air moved the way heat moves above asphalt, a shimmer, a suggestion of displacement. And then Wukong was standing near the far wall with his staff across his shoulders and the expression of a man who has wandered back to check on something he left running. Wonder Woman's hand moved to her sword. She stopped it there. Assess first. He was looking at the vehicle still embedded in the concrete, the axle, the mud wheel situation. What had been a significant piece of regime siege hardware. He seemed to find the engineering outcome mildly interesting, like a person noting an unusual cloud formation. Not impressed, just cataloging it. Still here, he said to no one in particular. His eyes moved to the squad leader, then to Wonder Woman. Something shifted in his attention the same way a scale tips when a heavier object is placed on it. Different uniform. I command this response, she said. I noticed. He tilted his head. Sword hand. She had not moved her hand from the hilt. She moved it now deliberately to her side, conceding the point without conceding anything else. You damaged regime property and disrupted an active security operation. Your security operation was running people over, he said, not heat in it. Just the observation delivered flat, like reading a meter that's in the red. Order requires enforcement. Sure. He glanced at the chalk on the ground where the rifles had been. How's that working? She crossed the distance in 4 strides, not a charge. A commitment, the difference being that a charge is about emotion and a commitment is about ending the problem efficiently. Her sword came out mid-movement angle, precise, the kind of strike that had closed wars. She was fast. She was, by any reasonable standard applied to this world, extraordinarily fast. Wukong was not in the position the strike was aimed at. He had not moved dramatically. He had not leaped, had not used the staff, had not done anything that would read as evasion to an observer with a stopwatch. He had shifted fractionally unhurried in the specific direction that put the sword through empty space. The blade passed through air that had been occupied a quarter second ago. Wonder Woman's follow-through carried her 2 steps past him. She caught herself immediately. No stumble, no overcorrection, the recovery of someone whose body has been trained to treat mistakes as data. She turned. Wukong was looking at her the way someone looks at a very well-built piece of furniture. "Good," he said. He reached out with the tip of his staff, not swung, not driven, just extended and tapped once against the breastplate of her armor. One knock, clean and dry like a knuckle on hollow metal. Not a blow, an annotation. She felt the heat rise in her jaw and held it there, locked behind the same discipline that had held Themyscira's shield wall at Marathon. The sound had not hurt her. The sound had been heard by every soldier in the concourse. That was the point of it, and they both knew it. "You fight like someone who means it," Wukong said. He pulled the staff back. "Wrong army, though. I choose who I serve. You choose who you guard." He said it without inflection, a factual correction, nothing more. Different thing. She did not answer that. Answering it would have required either agreeing or explaining, and she had no interest in being drawn into his frame of the conversation. She stepped back, not retreat adjustment, and her free hand moved behind her to signal. 3 gestures. The soldiers understood. The cordon contracted. Not dramatically, smoothly with the precision of a unit that had rehearsed this exact movement. The exit sealed. The ring tightened from 4 points simultaneously. If Wukong was going to leave, he would leave through people, and Wonder Woman had made certain those people were currently the most prepared soldiers in the building. She also reached back with her other hand and unclipped the lasso from her hip. She held it loosely at her side, not deployed, not threatening, just present, changing her tools in full view because the first approach hadn't resolved the problem and she had better options. Wukong watched the cordon close with mild interest. "Tighter," he said, as if giving a recommendation. "You're not leaving?" she said. He looked at the ceiling, then at the sealed exits, then at the lasso at her side. His expression carried the specific quality of someone examining a pleasant puzzle, engaged unhurried with no apparent anxiety about how it resolves. "Tell me," he said, "does the man in the red cape know you're doing his containment work for him? Superman leads the regime. We all serve that." "He leads," Wukong agreed. "You serve." He said both words the same way, neutral even, and the difference between them landed like the staff tap had landed, not a blow, an annotation. "I was just checking." He rolled the staff once across his palm. 72. Earthly transformations had a particular quality at the moment of application. Not the flash of a weapon being drawn, but the quiet of a door being opened. One of his hairs drifted from his shoulder, caught in air that had no current in this sealed room, and rose. 4 things happened in the next 2 seconds. The hair became a copy. The copy stood where Wukong had been standing. The soldiers nearest the northeast corner moved to close training, correct exactly what the situation called for, and reached the copy just as the original stepped through a gap in the cordon that had not existed 3 seconds ago, placed the butt of his staff on the tile of the exit corridor outside, and was gone. The copy dissolved into a handful of loose hairs that drifted to the ground. The ring had closed on nothing. Wonder Woman stood at the center of the floor and held the lasso and let the information process. The soldiers looked at each other and then at her, waiting for direction, which was what soldiers did when a situation exceeded its own playbook. She gave them direction. "Tighten the electromagnetic net. Double the ground sensors. I want footage from every camera within 6 blocks cross-referenced with facial recognition." A pause. and get me a line to Superman. The squad leader's hand was already on his comm. She looked at the loose hairs on the tile golden, already losing their color, already becoming ordinary, and recognized them for what they were: a receipt. Proof of transaction. He had been here, he had done what he came to do, and he had left the evidence of his method where she could study it. Which meant she understood that he did not particularly care if she learned the method. That was either arrogance or a demonstration that learning the method would not help her. She was beginning to think it was both. There was a word for what he was, and the word was not in any of the regime's tactical classifications. Not enhanced. Not divine exactly, though the classification was adjacent. Something older than those labels. Something that had existed before people in this world started building filing systems for things that frightened them. Themyscira had a word for it. She had not used it in a long time because the things it described were not supposed to be walking around in mortal conflicts over mortal politics. They were supposed to be in other places dealing with other orders of problem. The fact that one of them had arrived here, apparently on a whim, and had spent the past hour breaking expensive machinery and annotating armor and leaving receipts, that was either a very good sign or a very bad one, and she could not yet determine which. She needed more information. Superman's satellite coverage, his intelligence files, any precedent at all for something like this. Most of all, she needed to know what it wanted. The problem, which she was only now fully articulating to herself, was that it did not appear to want anything. "Superman," she said when the line opened. "We have a problem that doesn't fit any of our categories. I need you here." A beat. Then, because she had been a general for longer than most of the buildings in this city had existed, bring everything. Superman arrived, the way he always arrived, now fast enough to make the approach feel like a statement. No warning, no radio contact. The sonic crack came first, then the displacement of air. Then the figure in blue and red standing at the hall's main entrance with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that stillness itself is a form of authority. The regime soldiers straightened. Not because they had been ordered to, because the room changed when he entered it. Wonder Woman met him at the threshold. She had been issuing commands for the past 11 minutes. Electromagnetic suppression grid, 6-block civilian lockdown, cross-reference drone sweeps, and she delivered the summary as she delivered everything without preamble, without softening. Single incursion, no identifiable origin point. Material losses across 2 engagements. Method of exit unconfirmed both times. She paused a beat. He tapped my breastplate and walked through a closed cordon. Superman took that in. His jaw moved once. Enhanced beyond any bracket we have. He was quiet for 3 seconds. She had worked alongside him long enough to know what that silence meant. He was filing, categorizing, routing the problem into the correct operational framework. Everything had a framework. That was the architecture of the regime. Give every problem a container, and the container would determine the response. He's still in the building. Unknown. He moves without signature. Then we find the signature. He looked at the squad leader. Every surveillance asset, full sweep. I want him located before he chooses to leave. The squad leader moved. The room moved with him. Superman turned back to Wonder Woman. You said he tapped your armor. In front of the unit. Deliberately. Something passed across his face, not rage, not yet. The thing before rage, the cold precursor that in another man might have been called wounded pride, but in Superman had become something more structural. An affront to the order he had built was not a personal injury. It was a systemic problem. Systems had solutions. He wants to be seen, Superman said. We'll let him be seen. Stunned, they found him on the 3rd floor. Not because the sweep located him, because he was standing in front of the monitoring hub's main display wall. 37 feeds, 43 cities, the full nervous system of the regime's eyes, and studying it the way he had studied the Hall of Justice 2 floors below. Like a tourist. Like someone reading a menu in a restaurant he has no intention of eating at. The displays showed detention transfers in Lyon, a checkpoint dispersal in Osaka, a regime broadcast prep in New York, cameras and lighting rigs, and a teleprompter waiting for words it had not yet been given. He moved his gaze across the wall, slowly cataloging without apparent emotion. One feed showed a residential block under curfew lockdown. Another showed a convoy carrying what the manifest labeled non-compliant individuals. He regarded both for the same amount of time with the same expression. "That's a lot of monitors," he said without turning around. "All those eyes, and you still needed 11 minutes to find me." Superman stepped into the room. Wonder Woman flanked him, left hand at her sword. 6 soldiers held the corridor behind them. "You've been trespassing in regime property," Superman said. "Damaging regime assets, interfering with authorized security operations." Wukong finally turned from the display wall. He took Superman in with the particular attention of someone seeing a familiar type for the first time in a new costume. His eyes moved from the boots to the symbol on the chest to the cape. "So that's what the Jade Emperor wears these days," he said. "Nice cape, very official. You'll identify yourself and state your purpose here." "My purpose?" Wukong seemed to find the question genuinely interesting. Interesting the way questions get when they're built on the wrong premise. He rolled the staff once across his palm. "I was checking your monitors. Did you know that one in the corner is showing a neighborhood lockdown for a curfew violation? Someone left their lights on. This world is under protection. That protection requires order, yeah." Wukong glanced back at the screen, showing the curfew block. "That neighborhood looks very protected." Superman crossed the room in 2 strides and put his hand on Wukong's shoulder. The grip was calibrated, not aggressive, precise. The kind of contact that says this conversation is now under my terms. Wukong dropped his gaze to the hand on his shoulder, then up to Superman's face. "You done," he said. He raised one finger and pressed it lightly, with no more force than you'd use to push a door open, against Superman's sternum. Superman did not move. This was not a choice. His feet stayed where they were. His cape didn't shift, The force he had arrived, with the weight of Kryptonian muscle, and 4 years of absolute authority, was pressing against something that did not register it as force. He pushed. The push went nowhere. He increased the output. The air around them heated slightly. The tile under his boots cracked from the distribution of effort, and the finger on his chest remained exactly where it was utterly unimpressed by the physics of the situation. 1 second. 2. The 6 soldiers in the corridor had a clear sight line. They were watching a man who could crack continents fail to move one finger. That would be in their reports. It would be in their memories for the rest of their lives, and their lives were going to be long, because the regime kept its soldiers alive. That was the calculation he had not finished when he crossed the room. In 4 years, 2 things had remained constant: the architecture of the regime and the fact that nothing had touched him without consequence. He had built the second thing carefully, the way you build a wall. One reinforced precedent at a time, one demonstration at a time, until the wall became its own argument. People did not challenge it because they had seen what happened when people challenged it. The finger was not challenging the wall. The finger was not acknowledging it existed. Superman stepped back. He did it slowly, deliberately, as if the withdrawal were a choice rather than the only available option, which is what you do when you are a man who understands that perception is half the structure of power. "You're strong," Wukong said. He lowered his finger. "But you've been mistaking nobody pushing back for your own weight." He tilted his head. It wasn't. Superman's voice, when it came out, had something compressed in it, the sound of a man running two calculations at once. "You have one opportunity to stand down." "From what?" "From whatever this is." Wukong smiled. It was not warm, and it was not cruel. It was the smile of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected. "Whatever this is," he repeated. "See, that's the problem. You don't know what this is. You've got 43 cities on your monitors, and you can't name the things standing in your building." He glanced at the display wall. "All those cameras. I bet they're all recording right now." They were. The surveillance hub was running continuous archive upload to the regime's central server. Everything in this room was being logged. Wukong pulled a single hair from his shoulder and breathed on it. It drifted upward, one small golden thing in a room full of running feeds, and then it was gone. On screen 7, the New York broadcast prep feed flickered once. "What did you just do?" Superman said. It was not a question. "Nothing yet," Wukong said. "Tasting the system." He turned back to the display wall one last time, the way you take a last look at something you're about to significantly rearrange. "You should check your archives." Then he was not in the room anymore. No crack, no shimmer. The space where he had been standing held nothing but the faint warmth of recently occupied air, and a single hair on the tile already losing its color. Screen 7 flickered again, then went still. Superman stood in front of the monitor bank for 4 seconds. Then he turned to Wonder Woman. His voice had the register it got when he had stopped processing and started deciding. "Lock it down. Everything. Every access point, every utility tunnel, every civilian transit route within 20 blocks. He turned to the soldiers in the corridor. "I want every drone in this city grid reassigned to active track. Full electromagnetic suppression on the perimeter. Clark, he's not a god." The words came out flat, certain the tone of a man correcting a misclassification. "He's a breach. Breaches get sealed." She did not argue. She had been a general long enough to know the difference between the moment for argument and the moment for execution. This was the second kind. But she noted the word, breach. She had used category when she briefed him. He had translated it without thinking she suspected into something smaller. Something the regime's vocabulary could process. Breaches could be sealed. Categories could not always be closed. "And the archive footage," she said. "Whatever he did to screen 7, pull it. Audit every frame since the first incursion." A pause. "And get me Dr. Fate." The squad leader looked up from his comm. "Sir, Dr. Fate doesn't respond to direct contact." "He will," Superman said, "when I explain what walked into my building." The squad leader passed the order without further comment. He was good at that. At receiving instructions that didn't fit any of his training parameters and executing them anyway. Because the alternative was explaining to Superman why a thing couldn't be done, and that conversation had a known outcome. Wonder Woman watched Superman cross to the door. His posture was correct. His pace was controlled. Everything about him said this situation is being managed. She had seen that posture before she had worn it herself, and she knew it for what it was, the performance of certainty in the absence of a plan. What he needed was a containment protocol for something that had already demonstrated twice in one building. The containment protocols did not apply to it. What he had was a directive to classify it harder. She looked at the hair on the tile, then at the feed bank. 37 angles, 43 cities, every camera running, every archive, logging clean and continuous. Whatever the hair had seeded into Screen 7, the New York primary broadcast staging feed, had already been uploaded to the central server. Neither of them knew that yet. Wukong did. She followed Superman out. Behind them, the monitoring hub hummed. Somewhere in its servers, 60 seconds of footage was sitting in a queue, waiting to become something other than a security archive. The system was designed to catch threats. It had no protocol for what to do when a threat used the system to carry something in. The first containment unit deployed at 3 in the morning. 12 personnel, electromagnetic suppression grid, 2 aerial assets, biometric tracking across a 6-block cordon. The unit had been assembled and briefed in 40 minutes, which was fast by any standard. The squad leader's orders were specific: locate, contain, do not engage beyond minimum necessary force. Alive. The word had come down from Superman personally, which told the unit 2 things: the target was worth something, and the situation was not under control. They found a trail at a checkpoint on the northern perimeter. The biometric array flagged an anomaly body heat signature, non-standard, moving through a transit corridor that the sensor grid showed as empty. The squad leader called it in, tightened the cordon, deployed 2 units to cut off the corridor exits. The corridor was empty when they reached it. The anomaly was gone. What remained was a set of electromagnetic cuffs, regime issue, rated for meta-human containment, the kind of hardware that cost more per unit than a standard soldier's monthly salary, lying on the ground open. Not broken, not cut. Open the way a hand opens when it decides to let something go. The locking mechanism was intact. The internal sensor read, secured. The cuffs held nothing but air. The squad leader filed the report. He used the phrase, mechanism failure, because he did not have a better phrase, and because the target opened them from inside without triggering the release protocol. Was not a phrase that had a field in the standard reporting form. The second unit received their briefing update at 20 minutes to 4. They lost the drone at 12 past 4. It had been tracking a thermal signature across the waterfront district standard pursuit pattern grid, sweep the kind of methodical coverage that had located 47 high-value targets in the past 18 months. The operator in the surveillance hub watched the feed called vectors, guided the unit on the ground. The signature was consistent. The signature was moving in a pattern that suggested limited awareness of pursuit. The signature led the drone directly above a food market that was not supposed to be open at 12 past 4, but was because the vendor had a permit that technically expired 2 years ago and had been renewing it informally ever since. The drone's thermal array saw 48 people buying produce in a covered market at 4 in the morning. Then the drone's camera feed showed a sparrow, not a new sparrow, the same sparrow, or something that functioned like the same sparrow, perched on the forward sensor housing exactly as it had perched in the Hall of Justice hours earlier. The feed ran for 11 seconds. Sparrow produced stalls, a woman haggling over the price of ginger, the back of a vendor's head. Then the sparrow was gone, and the drone was logging its own position over an empty stretch of waterfront 40 meters from where the operator had been guiding it. The operator filed a calibration report. He noted the sparrow in the supplementary field as possible wildlife interference. He did not note the 11 seconds of market recording because he did not know what to do with it. 40 meters away, the ground unit swept the waterfront and found nothing. They held position and waited for new vectors that did not come. Down. The converted warehouse on the east side of the district had been a warehouse before the regime repurposed it. It still had the bones of a warehouse high ceiling, wide floor-loading bay doors, but the interior had been refitted with holding cells along the north wall and a processing station where the biometric intake system cataloged everyone who came through the building's gates. Just before 5, the system flagged an entry anomaly. Someone had entered the holding site through the loading bay, without triggering the perimeter sensors. The internal motion detectors had logged the presence at 13 minutes to 58 minutes earlier. But the alert had been queued behind 17 other processing notifications and had not yet surfaced to the duty officer's screen. By the time the duty officer saw the alert and scrambled the internal response team, the presence had been inside for 23 minutes. The cells along the north wall were intact. No one had been removed, no one had been added. The site's 42 current detainees, 12 for curfew violations, 18 for association with non-compliant entities, 9 for distribution of prohibited information, 3 for reasons that the intake forms listed as administrative hold were exactly where they were supposed to be. But every intake form in the system had been modified. Not altered, the names, dates, and charges were unchanged. What had changed was a single field on each form, the one labeled status. Every form now read, released by order of. The field after that was blank. The duty officer spent 4 minutes trying to determine if this was a system glitch or a security breach before concluding it was both and calling it up the chain. WW received the report just after 5. She read it twice, recognized it for what it was, also not a jailbreak, a message, and added it to the escalation log she had been maintaining since midnight. 32 minutes later, she stood in front of the building's external camera array with the log in hand and looked at the loading bay door. There was a mark on the door, circular, clean-edged about the diameter of a coin. She had seen a mark exactly like it on the tile of the Hall of Justice's concourse. She did not touch it. She almost heard the sound it had made. Outside the processing center, a family had been waiting since 2 in the morning. They had driven 4 hours because one of the 18 association detainees was theirs. They had the paperwork, a character statement, an employment record, a document from a local official that might carry some weight if the right person happened to be processing intake that morning. They had been told to wait at the checkpoint 50 meters from the center's main gate. They were still waiting at 6 when the shift changed, and the new checkpoint officer told them that processing for non-critical cases had been suspended pending a security review. He could not tell them when it would resume or who to contact. He had a form they could submit to the regional administrative office, which was located in a building that had been converted to regime use 14 months ago and whose intake hours had not been updated since. The family filled out the form. The checkpoint officer took it and placed it in a stack with 11 others from the overnight queue. He did not tell them that the security review had been triggered by a modification to the intake database that no one had authorized and no one could explain. He did not tell them this because he did not know it, and because knowing it would not have changed what he told them. Just after 6, the regime surveillance hub received an alert from the central archive system. 61 seconds of archived material had been flagged by the automated review protocol. The clip was from Screen 7, the New York primary broadcast staging feed, and it showed the monitoring hub's third-floor room from an angle that was not any of the room's installed cameras. The angle was from approximately where Wukong had been standing when he released the hair. The recording showed Superman failing to move one finger, not the whole sequence. Not the conversation, not the commands that followed. Just that 38 seconds of a man who could move mountains, pressing against something that did not notice him, and then stepping back. The archive system had flagged it because the file did not match any installed camera ID. The automated review protocol had flagged it because 38 seconds of the regime's commanding authority, demonstrably failing to accomplish a physical task, was categorized under the regime's own content guidelines as material potentially damaging to institutional stability. The duty analyst stared at the flag for a long moment. Then she quarantined the material, escalated the alert to level 3, and sent a priority notification to Wonder Woman's secure channel. Deletion required sign-off from 2 senior officers. One was in a vehicle en route to the East Side building. The other was in a briefing with Superman that had started at 6 in the morning and was not scheduled to end for another 40 minutes. The file sat in quarantine. The quarantine was air-gapped from the external network. It had been air-gapped from the external network for 11 minutes when the automated sync protocol, the one that ran every 12 minutes and was not technically part of the external network, but interfaced with 3 systems that ran its scheduled cycle. It wasn't a breach. The system hadn't been broken into. It had been mocked. At 7, Wonder Woman walked into the briefing room where Superman was reviewing the night's operational log. She put her tablet on the table. On the screen, the flag noticed the material's timestamp and a 3-word note from the duty analyst that read, "Archive compromised, recommend." Superman read it. He read the timestamp. He looked at the run time, 38 seconds. He did not ask what it showed. He already knew. "Lock external broadcast interfaces," he said. "All of them, immediately." "It may already." "Lock them." The words had that compressed quality again, the sound of a decision being made that could not be unmade. "And find out where that file went." Wonder Woman sent the order. The broadcast lockdown took 4 minutes to implement across the regime's 43 city feeds. The upload had completed in 2. Somewhere in a regime holding site's external camera array, a single mark on a loading bay door caught the early morning light. Circular, clean-edged patient. 2 cities away. Batman received an encrypted file with no sender information and a file name that read, check_your_archive.mkv. The timestamp was wrong by exactly 1 second. He opened it. Wonder Woman issued the new operational directive just before dawn. She did not call it a pursuit. She called it a containment grid, which was a different thing. Pursuit assumed a target that moved in predictable vectors toward an exit. What she was dealing with did not move in vectors and had demonstrated across multiple engagements that exits were irrelevant to it. So she stopped thinking about exits and started thinking about space. The directive had 3 components. First, 4 anchor points at the district's cardinal positions, each staffed by a 12-person unit with interlocking fields of coverage. The positions did not move. They were the corners of a box. The box would not catch him. The box would define the geometry, establish what inside meant, so that anything inside it had a bounded relationship to the outside. Second, rotating checkpoint intervals, not fixed. Every 90 seconds, the net's internal configuration shifted by 40 degrees. The pattern had been designed by the regime's tactical AI and had no discernible repetition cycle within a 6-hour window. She had reviewed the model herself. She did not expect it to hold. She expected it to last long enough to generate data. Third, a sensor array running 3 concurrent sweeps thermal biometric motion differential feeding a central analysis hub, where 2 operators cross-referenced anomalies in real time. Every alert tagged and timestamped. Every signal that resolved into nothing logged as a negative confirmation. She wanted the shape of the absence because the shape of the absence was where he was. "Stop chasing the man," she had told the briefing room. "Box the space." No one had asked what happened if the space didn't respond to boxing. She had not invited the question. The first hour of the operation produced 47 irregularities. 39 resolved as civilian activity, a delivery route that cut through the eastern sector. A maintenance crew accessing utility tunnels with permits that were technically valid. 11 people who had not received the curfew extension notice and were caught in the wrong place by the sweep's expanded parameters. The regime's processing teams handled each one according to protocol. The maintenance crew's permits were confiscated pending verification. 8 of the 11 were held at a secondary checkpoint. while their identities were confirmed against the regime's association database. The remaining 8 did not resolve. They appeared on the sensor array as brief, clean signals present for 2 or 3 seconds, consistently located in the gaps between the rotating boundary positions, and then vanished. Not faded. Vanished the way a light turns off rather than dims. The pattern, if there was one, was consistent with something that understood the cordon's rotation cycle and was moving in the intervals. The tactical AI assessed the probability of a single entity producing that signature pattern as 0.003%. Wonder Woman looked at the assessment for 1 second, then set it aside. The AI was calculating based on known entity classes. What it had assigned a 0.003% probability to was, in her estimation, the most likely explanation available. Just before 9, a unit on the western anchor reported a comm irregularity. It lasted 4 seconds. During those 4 seconds, the unit received what their equipment logged as a valid command signal. Same frequency, same encryption. Key structure, same command, authentication header, as the signals that had been running all morning, telling them to hold position and stand down secondary coverage. 3 soldiers followed the order before the squad leader caught it. That post's secondary coverage dropped for 4 seconds. In the sensor array's gap analysis, those 4 seconds showed a clean transit across the boundary line. The squad leader filed an immediate report. He included the signal's authentication header. The regime's signal intelligence team ran a trace in 6 minutes and confirmed what the squad leader had already suspected: the header was valid. But the originating node did not exist. The signal had been generated from inside the net, using authentication credentials that had never been issued to any unit in the field. It wasn't hacking. It was handwriting the net had been made to lie in its own script. Wonder Woman read the report. She looked at the timestamp 8:47. 2 minutes later, an impression appeared on the post's primary barrier, a vehicle checkpoint, armored, rated for medium impact engagement. It sat on the driver's side door at eye level. Circular, clean-edged, the diameter of a coin. She studied it for a long time. It did not explain how the authentication credentials had been generated. It did not explain how the signal had been transmitted from inside a sensor-covered ring without triggering a single detection sweep. It did not explain the physics of any of this. What it said, what it clearly deliberately said was, "I was here. I looked at what you built. I walked through it." 3 blocks north of the western anchor, a hospital's emergency entrance had been caught inside the containment grid since before dawn. This had not been intended. The grid had been drawn from district maps that did not include the hospital's expanded emergency annex, which had been built 14 months ago under a construction permit that the regime's district records had not yet incorporated into the standard tactical overlay. The annex put the emergency entrance 40 meters inside the perimeter's inner boundary. By 9-2 ambulances and a supply vehicle had been held at the checkpoint on the outer boundary line for 1 hour and 17 minutes each. The checkpoint officer had the authority to pass medical vehicles under emergency protocols, but not under containment geometry operations, which was a classification that had not existed in the protocol library until that morning, and whose exception criteria had not been written yet. He had requested clarification from the chain of command at 7:48 and 8:30. He was still waiting for a response at 9. The supply vehicle carried dialysis materials for a ward on the hospital's 3rd floor. The driver sat in the cab and did not look at the checkpoint officer and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would change the answer he had already received 3 times. Just past 9, Wonder Woman stood at the post's outer barrier and looked at the coin-sized mark on the door. Around her, the rotation cycle was still executing. The sensor arrays were still logging. Everything was functioning exactly as designed. It had produced 47 civilian detentions, a compromised comm signal, 2 ambulances waiting outside a hospital, and 1 impression on a door. She had not caught him. She had not expected to catch him. She had expected to map the shape of his movement, and she had done that. And what the map showed was that the shape did not respond to boxing the way spaces were supposed to respond. The 8 signals in the gap analysis were not a pattern she could close. They were a signature. He was showing her the signature because he wanted her to see it. That was the part she kept returning to. He was not evading, not the way a fugitive evades with urgency and economy. He was touring, walking through her work like a craftsman inspecting a building. Someone else constructed, noting the joints, checking the tolerances, tapping the walls to hear what they're made of. The impression on the door was not vandalism. It was a review. She had been a general for 3,000 years. She had never before built something specifically designed to be impervious to an audience of 1. She thought about the intake forms released by order of. The field left blank. She thought about the comm signal that had used valid credentials from a node that didn't exist. What kind of entity treats a containment operation as an opportunity to demonstrate its understanding of the containment operation? Then she issued 2 orders. The first, pull back the outer ring to a tighter defensive perimeter around regime assets only. Stop covering civilian ground. The net had become a liability. Every civilian detained, every ambulance held, every permit confiscated, was a data point in a record that someone somewhere was presumably compiling, and she had a reasonable suspicion about who. The second, a message to Superman, 3 sentences. Containment is a performance. He's treating it like a demonstration. We need a different kind of asset. She did not specify what kind. She did not need to. Superman had already requested Dr. Fate 2 days ago. She took one more look at the impression on the door. Then she walked to the eastern post, where the morning's second shift was preparing to rotate. On the door behind her, the mark caught the light the same way it had caught the light on the loading bay door hours earlier and 1 city away. Patient, circular, signed. Batman watched the file 3 times before he trusted what he was seeing. The first time, the content. 38 seconds. A finger on a chest, a man who could crack tectonic plates failing to move it. The step back, slow and deliberate, performed for the 6 soldiers in the corridor who were going to remember it for the rest of their careers. The second time, the angle. The 3rd floor room had 4 installed cameras. He had the layout from a 6-month-old schematic pulled from a regime construction filing. None of the 4 cameras could produce that angle slightly above eye level south-southwest, approximately where a person would stand if they had arrived from a direction the room's sensors had not been designed to cover. The 3rd time, the metadata. Timestamp, April 17th, 2023. Then April 17th, 2024. Then April 17th, 2023 again. 1 second repeated. Not a glitches produced corrupted frames, dropped data artifacts. This was clean footage with a timestamp that had been told to count wrong. The way you might write a wrong date on a letter. Deliberately. To make sure someone noticed. He closed the file and sat with it for a moment. He had spent 4 years building a resistance out of salvage people who couldn't be bought tech, that could be hidden information, that could be moved without the regime's surveillance catching it. In 4 years, he had developed a reasonably complete picture of what the regime could and could not do. And the gap between those 2 things had been the insurgency's entire operating margin. The file suggested that someone had walked into the regime's architecture, examined it, and found the gap amusing. "He's not hiding," he said to Alfred, who was not in the room, but was on comms. "He's staging." That interpretation assumes considerable premeditation. Everything in that file assumes considerable premeditation. He turned the tablet over. On the back, he had attached a single golden hair, one of 3 recovered from the Hall of Justice's concourse and smuggled out in a sealed specimen case before the regime's sweep teams arrived. He had been running analysis on it for 2 days. Every instrument returned the same result: mammalian. Unremarkable. The instruments did not have a classification for what it actually was. He wants us to look. The question is what he wants us to see. Concerned, he found Wukong, or more precisely Wukong, allowed himself to be found in a parking structure on the city's west side at 11 at night. Batman had run the gap analysis from Wonder Woman's containment operation through his own modeling suite, mapped the 8 transit signatures against the city's utility infrastructure, and identified 3 locations where the movement pattern's implied vectors intersected with spaces that were simultaneously inside the regime's surveillance grid and structurally invisible to it. The parking structure was one of them. 6 levels concrete construction blocking thermal sweep pre-regime security system that hadn't been updated since the regime stopped maintaining civilian infrastructure. Wukong was on the 4th level, sitting on the ledge watching the city's skyline with the easy posture of someone who has no immediate concerns and no particular schedule. "You mapped my gaps," he said without turning around. "I mapped the geometry." Batman stepped off the elevator. He did not move toward the ledge. "Wonder Woman tried to box you. You let her see where you were moving. You wanted someone to find you. I wanted to see who was paying attention." Wukong glanced back. His assessment of Batman took approximately 2 seconds head-to-toe gear to posture, and his expression registered something between mild curiosity and the faint satisfaction of a man who has been expecting a specific guest. "You're not regime." "No. But you're not free either." "Not anymore." Wukong looked back at the skyline. Below them, a regime patrol unit ran a checkpoint, sweep lights, biometric scanners, the mechanical efficiency of a system that had been running on the same protocols for 4 years. "Your street," he said. "Your problem. That's why I'm here." Batman moved to a support column, kept it between himself and the open air. "Old habit. You've been dismantling their operations for days. You're not trying to take the district. You're not trying to liberate anyone. You're running a demonstration. Smart Bat. What do you want?" Wukong turned fully for the first time. The question seemed to genuinely amuse him, not the mocking amusement of someone being condescended to, but the real thing. The kind that comes from being asked a question that everyone else has been too afraid to ask directly. "What do I want?" he repeated. He looked at the skyline below. "I wanted to see if your red-caped Jade Emperor was as untouchable as he thought." A pause. "He's not." "I know that. I've been saying it for 4 years." Batman kept his voice level. "I need you to aim at something specific." The amusement didn't leave Wukong's face, but something settled behind it the moment a test reaches its answer. "There it is. I'm not asking you to serve anyone. That's what this is." The words came out flat, not aggressive, the tone of a diagnosis being delivered. "You want me pointed? Aimed. Fired when useful." He shook his head once. "I've been in cages built by people who thought they were doing me a favor. The cage is always the same. Doesn't matter who builds it or why. I'm not offering a cage. You're offering a target. Same principle." Wukong stood from the rail. He was shorter than the costume suggested the staff. The armor, the presence filled space that the physical frame didn't account for. "You break laws to build your version of a cage. I break them because I don't like cages." He fixed Batman with a flat assessment of someone who has been reading people for longer than most people have existed. Different thing. Batman did not answer that. He had contingency arguments prepared, 3 of them, each built from a different angle of appeal. He set all 3 aside. They were designed for a person who wanted something. This one didn't. The broadcast, Batman said instead. Superman's global address. 4 days. I have the internal schedule. Something shifted in Wukong's attention. Not surprise. More like the moment when a game becomes interesting. He's going to use it to consolidate, Batman continued. Frame everything that's happened as evidence. The regime's controls are working. Turn the footage of this week into a stability narrative. All those cameras, Wukong said almost to himself. The same tone he'd used in the monitoring hub. I bet they're all pointing at him. Everyone. Wukong was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he reached up, pulled a single hair from his shoulder, and held it out between 2 fingers. Batman took it. It was warm, which hair should not be. For what? Batman asked. 1 exit. Checkpoint, surveillance gate, regime cordon, pick 1. Wukong rolled the staff once. Don't use it to be clever. Use it when you're out of options. I'll know the difference. It's not an alliance. Wukong turned back to the edge. I wanted to see what you'd do with 4 years and a city. You built something. Small, broken, but yours. He turned to the checkpoint below, where a civilian was being processed through the biometric intake scanner. The process took 40 seconds. The civilian stood with the patient exhaustion of someone who had done this enough times to have stopped resisting it. Tell me, if he locks this down any harder, more checkpoints, more detention criteria, tighter broadcast controls, what breaks first? Everything he's trying to protect, Batman said. Wukong watched the civilian clear the scanner and walk away, shoulders still carrying the shape of 40 seconds of being processed like data. Then you don't need me to aim. You need him to keep building. He stepped off the rail. Not a jump a step the way you step off a curb. The 4th level was 60 feet above street level. The step took him off the edge, the air folded once like cloth disturbed by a closing door, and he was gone, no impact. Below, no displacement above. Batman stood at the edge and looked at the checkpoint. The next civilian was already in the scanner. He had come here with 3 arguments prepared and left with none of them used. What he had instead was a single warm hair in his fist and a clearer picture of what the next 4 days were going to look like. It was not a comfortable picture. It was, however, accurate, which was more than he could say for most of what the regime produced. The checkpoint scanner processed the civilian in 38 seconds. The civilian walked away. Another one took their place. He's going for the broadcast stage, Batman said. Alfred's voice came back measured dry. Should I prepare something for the morning? Prep the safe houses. He turned from the edge. And pull every frame of archive material the regime filed this week. I want to know what he's already built. The broadcast was scheduled for 7 in the evening Eastern. The production team had been in the studio since 6 that morning. 12 hours of prep for a 17-minute address that would reach 43 cities simultaneously, and an estimated global audience of 2.3 billion people. The ops room ran 3 producer stations, 2 audio engineers, a graphics operator managing the regime's lower third package, and a transmission delay buffer set to 8 seconds. 8 seconds was standard. It existed to catch technical failures, unexpected audio, anything that might need to be pulled before it reached the audience. It was almost never used. In 4 years of regime transmissions, nothing unintended had ever made it into the outgoing signal. That was not an accident. It was a demonstration. Superman's podium stood at the center of the studio floor, not a traditional lectern, something more architectural, a structure that positioned the speaker, slightly elevated and slightly forward so that every camera angle produced the same compositional read authority above audience below. The regime's design team had spent 6 weeks on it. The symbol on the front was backlit. The prompter ran at the exact pace Superman's speechwriters had calculated to produce optimal cadence. Not too slow, not too fast. The rhythm of a man who always knows what he's going to say next. 2 minutes before Air Superman entered the studio. The production team did not applaud. They adjusted. The address began precisely on time. Earlier this week, Superman said, an unauthorized entity entered regime-controlled space and attempted to destabilize critical infrastructure. The script scrolled. He did not look at it. He had read the speech once, and the words were already where they needed to be. Not memorized, internalized, the way a building is internalized after you have walked through it enough times. The regime's response was immediate, coordinated, and effective. Every compromised system was isolated. Every affected operation was contained. The integrity of this administration's security framework held. In the control room, the producer watched the graphics operator drop the first lower third regime security fully operational. Clean white text on the standard blue field. The graphics package had been signed off 3 days ago. The entity in question, Superman, continued, has demonstrated a pattern of interference that cannot be characterized as anything other than a deliberate attempt to undermine the stability this regime has built. The stability that keeps this world from returning to the chaos it nearly fell into 4 years ago. His voice carried the quality of a man making a documented record, not a speech. He was not performing conviction. He was depositing it for the archive, for the 43 city feeds, for 2.3 billion people who needed to understand that the system keeping them safe was still functioning and that its functioning was not in question. I will have order, he said. That is not a threat. It is a commitment. The prompter reached the second paragraph break. The on-air light in the ops room burned steady red. 4 minutes and 17 seconds in the delay unit received an input it had not been given. The input did not come through any of the studio's installed systems. The producer's board showed no anomaly. The graphics operator's station showed no anomaly. The audio stream was clean. The 8-second buffer processed the input, found no flags in its automated content review, and forwarded it to the outgoing transmission because the input had arrived with valid authentication headers and a profile that matched the studio's own output. No key was stolen. The lock decided to agree. It wasn't a breach. It was an interruption, the difference between forcing a door and being handed the key by someone who understood locks better than the locksmith. 8 seconds later, the transmission that 2.3 billion people were watching shifted. Not a cut, a replacement. Seamless. The studio remained on in the production monitors. Superman mid-sentence, the prompter scrolling. But the outgoing stream was showing something else. The detention center on the east side of the district. The loading bay door with the coin-sized mark. The intake forms on a processing station screen every status field reading. Released by order of, and then nothing. The ambulances outside the hospital perimeter that morning. Their hazard lights running, the drivers not looking at the checkpoint officers. The checkpoint scanner processing a civilian. 38 seconds. The civilian walking away with the shape of 38 seconds still in their shoulders. The monitoring hub's third-floor room. A finger on a chest. A man pressing against something that did not register the pressure, and then stepping back. No narration, no title card, no graphic package. 17 seconds of footage assembled with the editorial instinct of someone who understood exactly what each image cost the thing it was aimed at. Then a single frame of figure on the studio floor standing where no figure should be standing between the podium and the nearest camera. Shorter than the costume implied. Staff across his shoulders. 1 second. He looked directly into the lens. "Keep going," he said. "I turned on subtitles." Then the studio signal came back. Superman mid-sentence, the prompter at the third paragraph, the on-air lights steady. As if nothing had interrupted, except the delay hold had already forwarded the interruption to every receiver. The 8 seconds had run. Whatever the hold contained for review the outgoing transmission had already gone. In the control room, the producer was out of his chair. The audio engineer had both hands on his board. The graphics operator's station was showing an error, state it had no diagnostic code for. "Kill it," someone said. "Cut the signal." "We can't cut," the producer said. He was looking at the outgoing transmission monitor. "We cut, and that's the story. We push through." Superman was still speaking. His voice had not changed. His cadence had not shifted. The prompter was still scrolling at the calculated pace, but his eyes, for just a moment, had moved to the space between the podium and the nearest camera, the space that was empty now that had not been empty 17 seconds ago. And something in them had that quality that the soldiers in the monitoring hub had recognized, and the squad leader and Wonder Woman. The calculation running behind the control. Batman watched the interruption on a monitor the size of a paperback in a safe house 3 districts away. He watched it once, then he set the monitor down. "That's the archive footage," he said. "He built it from what they filed." Alfred said nothing. There was nothing useful to add. 21 minutes after the address ended, Superman issued 4 directives. Expand detention criteria to include association with any entity that had distributed, replayed, or amplified the interrupted address material. Lock all transmission interfaces, civilian, commercial, governmental, within the regime's 43 city feeds, pending a full integrity audit. Double the biometric sweep parameters across all active cordon zones. And a 4th directive issued on a private channel to a single recipient: find him, not contain. Find. The distinction mattered. Contain was a classification. Find was a priority. In the studio, the crew was being escorted to a secondary processing area for questioning. Not arrested, questioned, which was a word that meant different things depending on the context and the questioner. The address had continued for its full 17 minutes. The record would show a complete address, uninterrupted, fully transmitted. Within minutes, the official archive upload replaced every replay across the regime's platforms. The clean version, the uninterrupted version, the version the record was going to insist had been the only version. The record was wrong. Every person who had been watching knew it was wrong. The regime's content protocol had no procedure for that specific kind of wrongness. The kind where the official record contradicts what 2.3 billion people had seen with their own eyes. The protocol assumed the gap between truth and record could be maintained by authority. It had not accounted for someone making the gap visible from inside the system itself. The unit's automated log showed no anomaly detected. 3,000 miles away, in a space that was not quite a room, Ares felt the evening's output and found it satisfactory. Not the interruption itself that was a trickster's game, small and specific. What pleased him was the response. The 4 directives. The expanded criteria. The studio staff being walked to secondary processing. The friction between what the record showed and what the audience remembered. Friction was energy. Sustained energy became heat. Heat in the right container became something useful. The regime had spent 4 years building that container. The monkey hadn't needed strategy. He'd only needed a match. That was fine. Ares had never required the catalyst to understand what it was igniting. He reached into the city's signal infrastructure where it interfaced with the fear running beneath it and turned a dial one increment. Not enough to notice, enough to matter. War always loved an audience.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.